This story has been recorded at an Addictive Eaters Anonymous meeting in New Zealand. You can email us at contact@aeanz.org.
My name's Di and I'm an addictive eater.
Hi, Di.
Grateful to be at a meeting and not to be eating. I believe that I was born with this disease because from a very young age I can remember eating in ways that made me feel uncomfortable, and when it was pointed out that my eating was disgusting, I didn't disagree. When my father pointed out that my third plate of ice cream was disgusting, I totally agreed, but I knew that I wasn't going to be able to stop doing it. Like, I might be able to stop doing it for one night and maybe even two, but come the third night I'm going to be going out to the garage, out to the freezer in the garage and getting another plate of ice cream, and I'm going to go to the fridge and I'm going to hope there's a silver top milk bottle in the fridge that hasn't been opened, because the silver top milk bottle has cream, and if you pour cream on the ice cream it forms a nice shell. And so it was all about trying to make it the most exquisite experience that I possibly could. I can tell you about my life according to what I've eaten, and when we were, like, I had two sisters and one brother, and when we were old enough to help do the dishes, we each had to nominate whether we would scrape, wash or dry, and I always wanted to get in first and scrape, because that meant I would get to the, be able to pick the roast meat or pick the roast potato. I can remember 5 o'clock, my mother says, don't have a piece of fruit, Diana, it is too close to dinner, and I totally agree. She says, you won't be hungry for dinner. I don't disagree, I totally agree, but I cannot not have a piece of fruit, and I don't just want a piece of fruit, I have to have the biggest apple in the fruit bowl. So that's just a little bit about what my eating was like. It wasn't actually my eating that caused me the biggest problem in life. It was how I felt about myself and how I felt like I just didn't know how to do life. But you wouldn't have known it because I presented really confidently and competently. Like, I had to cover up for how I felt on the inside. I didn't want you to get too close to me, because I couldn't afford for you to find out that I was really very insecure on the inside, and basically I felt like I was going to end up in a loony bin one day. But I was Miss Independent, Miss Career Woman, and Miss Opinionated, and Miss Confident externally, and I carried that off very well until I wasn't able to carry it off any longer. Like, as in, I was successful. I did well at school, and then I was a Rotary Exchange student, so it's looking pretty good. And then I complete my 3-year tertiary education. Nobody but me knows that at the end of my first year I get an A. At the end of my second year I get a B, and at the end of my third year I get a C. And I'm bonded to the health department, so I'm given a job, basically, thank God. Because if it had been left to me, I don't know if I could have pulled that part of it off, with the progression of this disease. I'm a young professional, and I'm working in a teaching hospital in a big city, and when I turned 21, I felt like there was absolutely nothing to celebrate because of how I felt about myself. But I didn't want to celebrate, but you had to celebrate. You couldn't not celebrate your 21st, because why would you not celebrate your 21st? You're supposed to celebrate your 21st. So I agreed to have a dinner party with aunties and uncles, and a group of my girlfriends. So that was fine. But 18 months in my first job in my career, then it's sort of like basically I'm 21, 22, and so my peer group are either getting married or they're going overseas. So thankfully for me, well, I was going overseas because it still looked like I was doing what was supposed to be happening at my age group. And, you know, there was no sign of me getting married because, you know, I didn't know how to have a relationship. I couldn't imagine spending your life with I couldn't imagine spending the whole day with somebody in that way, let alone your whole life. But I was good at flirting, and I'd be hot and cold, and, you know, especially if I was under the influence. I went off my merry way on my big overseas experience, and I went and lived in London, met my friends there who were there before me, and you know, carried on leading life as if everything was just fine on the outside. But things started to go very sort of wrong internally for me when I was living in London, and as in, you know, I found myself in my first job in London, and I really thought I didn't have a clue what the heck I was supposed to be doing in this job. And I'm supposed to know what I'm supposed to be doing because I'm a qualified professional, and it's not a very complicated job, but I just really didn't know what I thought I should be doing. So it was you know, a period of real unease, and I managed to sort of change jobs because I didn't have a permanent job. I was working for an agency, so it was quite normal to change jobs. And somehow, eventually I managed to get in a job that I managed to find a comfort level within myself, that everything started to seem like it was actually going okay. And I was able to make a couple of friends. And I can remember we had a dinner party one night at one of their places, and like this was a very normal thing to be happening, a dinner party. And so I'm feeling kind of relieved that I'm okay, like maybe I am okay after all. I'm at a dinner party, and this is what you do when you're in your early 20s, you have dinner parties at your friends' places. But even so, there was sort of this potential relief that, you know, maybe I am well adjusted to life, and I'm, you know, all is fine. But even so, in the back of my mind, there was still this feeling that it wasn't going to last, you know, that there was something wrong with me, and I'm going to end up in a loony bin one day. So, you know, it wasn't. The way I ate was not the biggest problem in my life. It was my inability to live life. I felt like I didn't know how to do life. And it just gradually became more evident that was, you know, that was reality. So I came back to New Zealand after 4.5 years away, and I thought I was coming home, but you know, the sky, when I got back to New Zealand, I discovered the sky was very blue. There was a lot of space between the houses, and the houses were different colours, and it didn't feel like home. And I went back to the hospital that I'd been working at before I left the country, and it was all just awful because the disease was progressing in me, insofar as I was becoming increasingly neurotic and, you know, insecure within myself. And within quite a short time, I had my first nervous breakdown, and so that was a very highly stressed time, and I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I was hugely embarrassed and hugely humiliated, such that I chucked my, new job in. I'd only been in this job about 3 months, but, I'm on the verge of having a nervous breakdown, and I don't want anyone to know, because that's not a good look. And so I just think the only option is to resign and get the hell out of here. I remember a physiotherapist said to me, "You can't resign because it'll look bad on your CV." And I thought, well, I don't really care about my CV, because I potentially think that walking into the sea with a brick tied around my waist is a good option, so I'm not really bothered what my CV looks like. And, she said, just take 3 weeks off. Oh, so-and-so over there suffering from depression, and she took 3 weeks off, but I had to get out. And so that is what I did. I resigned, and what am I? I'm about 25 or 26. I'm driving home to my parents' place as a 26-year-old, and with not a clue what I'm going to do. But I go to the GP, and the GP says, "You've got depression, it's not your fault, take these antidepressants and you'll be all right." And I knew that I didn't agree with that. I didn't want to do that, but I didn't feel like I had any other option. So I started taking the pills, and I tried to figure out what the heck, was wrong with me. Did I have a psychiatric illness? I must have delusions of grandeur, because I had advanced in my career, well, so, but this is what it had come to, nervous breakdown. So was I paranoid, schizophrenic? What was I? I really, but anyway, I was just told I had depression. And my mate she said, "Come and start a new life down in Christchurch in the South Island." I never thought I'd live in the South Island. I was a North Islander, and actually my plans for me were to go to advance in my career and go and continue my practice in the USA, because that was, that would be a very career orientated future plan for myself. Never had any plans to ever come and live in the South Island. But I didn't have a better plan. So that's what happened. I came down to Christchurch to live, and, I'm not well. I'm not employable, and so it's like, well, I find myself here now. What am I going to do? And that's just the way the disease progressed in me. I tried to get a job, and I did get offered a job in a photography shop, because I love photography, and I was able to present well enough. But the reality of having a job in a photography shop was just way too shocking. I might present well, but any moment now I could burst into tears. So what am I going to do serving a customer in a photography shop if I'm prone to bursting into tears? Or so I knew I couldn't do that. And anyway, I'm a health professional, so it's a bit below my standards in life, to accept a job in a photography shop, even though I love photography. So I eventually got myself into the welfare system, because I needed an income, it was a horrible time, horrible. During and I'm talking about a horrible number of years, where I was able to work for a very short period, but I also spent time going to the local, polytech and doing courses, and I went to university as an adult student. And that was a relatively better year because, it looked to my friends as if I'd found my niche. Di was off pursuing a different career. But, ultimately the disease was still progressing, and I think when I went to enrol in that second year at university, I'd arrive at lectures at the end instead of the beginning. And I turned up to enrol, and I just thought, what am I doing this for? It was like I was going to enrol in feminist studies and something else, and I thought, what am I doing this for? And so it didn't happen. What happened was I took myself off to the psychiatric hospital and admitted myself to the private psychiatric hospital because I knew that I wasn't right, and I knew that I didn't want to be admitted into the psychiatric hospital here where I lived because, well, I knew that I could work there, so, I couldn't face being admitted into somewhere where I could be working. It didn't occur to me that I could actually be working in the private psychiatric hospital as well. But that's what happened, and I stayed in that hospital for a number of months and couldn't stay there forever because, basically I couldn't afford to be there for the length that I was there, and the only reason I could stay there was because my parents found themselves obliged to, pay for me to be there, and that couldn't go on forever, so I had to leave and came back to Christchurch and became a client of the mental health system and started to live in a local residential service. And this is just how the disease progressed in me. I finally got involved in an organisation that gave me somewhere to go and something to do. It provided activities for adults with mental illness. Well, I needed somewhere to go and something to do because I wasn't employable. So I got involved in this organisation, and I actually, I was a relatively high-functioning client within this organisation, and eventually I actually became employed, and when I became employed, I actually thought that would be the solution to my living problem. Like, I'd be a respectable citizen again, and I would join a tennis club and play tennis on the weekend, and everything would be all right. And I actually noticed when I walked down the street, I felt like I held my head higher because I had a job. So I was respectable. But of course it was just stress, and that I didn't have any way of coping with. And my boss, he was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He was very open about that, and he used to talk to me quite a bit, and I used to be very open about the fact that my father was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He used to talk about having a disease, and I thought that was very strange. And he'd been a member of AA for about 13 years at that stage, and I thought that was very strange too. Why would you still be a member 13 years down the track? Anyway, he invited me to a lunchtime meeting, very strange invitation to extend to a nice woman like myself. But I agreed to go, and he encouraged me to listen to the similarities and not the differences, like listen to the feelings and the thinking, which I think was really good advice. I actually couldn't tell you what I heard that I identified with. I only remember a woman's story who was very different from mine. Basically, she'd been a drug addict in Amsterdam. But I was on holiday for 2 weeks, and so I didn't see my boss, but I found out how to get to more of those meetings because what I heard must have given me hope. Found out how to get to more AA meetings and started turning up. And in AA, I started to meet women, many of whom are sitting in the room tonight, who were members of a food fellowship. Went up to this woman one night, said, "What meetings do you go to?" expecting her to tell me what AA meetings. And she said she goes to this food fellowship. And so the seed was planted that I pretty much suspected that I belonged in the food fellowship too, because I knew that my eating in many ways was like my drinking. But I wasn't happy about that because it didn't seem a very glamorous proposition, and in fact it made being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous seem positively glamorous. So my sponsor in AA was also a member of this food fellowship, and I used to talk to her about how I didn't need to come to the food fellowship. And she would say, well, nobody's saying you do die, and people who don't have a problem don't go on about whether they have or haven't got a problem. And I think I went on about it often enough that she finally said, put yourself out of your misery, either decide to come to a meeting or decide not to. So I said, okay. I said in a begrudging voice, okay, I'll come to a meeting. And she took me to that first meeting. At that first meeting, I heard somebody say they used to be a rigid thinker, and I couldn't believe that you could say that out loud because I knew I was. That's the only thing I remember from that first meeting. So, yeah, I felt exposed, and so therefore I decided I wasn't coming back to any more of these meetings. I was just going to stick to the other fellowship because I needed to stick to something, like, you know, I needed to be going to meetings. That's, you know, so I carried on just going to AA and eating until I got to further down the track, and it was suggested I come to 6 meetings, which I really liked. I really liked that suggestion because it's very clear what you're supposed to be doing. Come to 6 meetings, which I did, and at the end of 6 meetings, I decided I wasn't as bad as everybody else. I could see you had a solution, but I wasn't as bad as you. I just couldn't imagine living without the food. And so I carried on, you know, for another 3 or 4 months, going to AA and not coming to the food fellowship. And I was a year in AA, and my sponsor didn't used to ring me up, but she rang me up this night and she said, "How does it feel to be sober?" And I felt like saying it's a pits. And I knew it was because of the food. Like, I hadn't taken a pill or I hadn't had a drink in that year, but I was still in the food. And I knew there was a solution, but up until this point in time, I hadn't been willing or bad enough. I wasn't quite beaten, I guess. I thought earlier on when I came into AA that I was sick of being sick, but I wasn't, you know, but by now I'm even sicker of being sick. So I decided that living in the solution had to be better than living in the problem. And I knew that meant coming to meetings regularly, and I knew it meant accepting, putting down the food. And I totally got that just like an alcoholic stops drinking in order to get well, I needed to stop eating. I didn't question that logic. It really made sense, and I mean, I didn't necessarily like hearing that message, but I didn't doubt it. And so, I heard that I needed to put down the food, and the pills and the alcohol. Well, I'd already put down the pills and the alcohol, so I hadn't had to pick up the first one. And I was really surprised that actually towards the end of my eating, I really did want that way of stopping eating, as in the weighed and measured food plan. I really actually wanted it, and up until that time I hadn't. And my sponsor met me in a cafe at lunchtime because she was working to, give me my food plan. And I bought my lunch from the cafe, and it was like I really didn't care what I had. I didn't know what I wanted, and I just knew whatever I chose, it wouldn't be what I wanted. And so I started doing what was suggested. I messed around a lot in the beginning with the food plan. I tried to make it more interesting because I was actually quite annoyed that the solution involved putting down the food. I mean, I thought it was grossly unjust. I mean, it's not very fair, is it? I guess I was still not, wondering what life was going to be like. In the back of my mind, I was only going to try it for as long as it took to prove that it didn't work for me, because then I would be free. I would have eliminated this horrible solution that was on offer. But fortunately for me, the same voice said, Di, you have been eating what you want when you want for 37 years, and you have been running your own life for 37 years, so, clearly that doesn't work for me. I can remember at one stage thinking, oh gosh, I'm being taught how to eat properly. And then I thought, well, actually, I know how to eat properly, I just can't do it. And I thought, well, I had the gift of desperation, and I knew there was no solution in food, because I knew that if I went to my favourite restaurant and had my favourite cheesecake, I just knew that there was no solution, that it wasn't going to do for me what I would want it to do for me. So I really got that the most important thing was not to pick up the first one. I guess I had hope for the first time in a long time, and I had a very healthy fear of not picking up the first one. And I really loved the big book, I really did. I got my hands on as much AA literature that I could, and devoured it basically. And I identified, I did initially, try to find the differences, but it spoke my language, and people in the rooms were so encouraging and so welcoming. And one of the things that really helped me keep coming back was that I knew that nobody in the rooms had a vested interest in me keeping on coming back. Like, they weren't going to try and convince me or coerce me. I knew that they had a vested interest in there being a newcomer in the room, and newcomers being in the room, but it didn't have to be me. So I was really free to, to decide whether to avail myself of this solution or not. I had seen you in the AA meetings, and I had become increasingly attracted to your recovery. I never thought I was terminally unique, and I never really doubted that if I did what you did, I would get what you had. I would get better too. I would get well. I heard that I was a sick person trying to get well, not a bad person trying to get good. And I heard the very simple message, don't pick up the first one, get to meetings and try and help someone else. And I must admit, it was a bit too simple for me. I would have preferred something more complicated. Like complex, I'm a sophisticated person. And I also thought that you should be running around after me. How was going to help someone else going to help me? And I didn't know how I could help someone else anyway, because I really didn't feel like I had any, means of helping anyone else. I had to be shown. I was encouraged to sit next to someone at a meeting and ask them how their day was and listen, which, I got that year. I had to listen. And if they asked me how my day was, I was to say it was fine, thank you. I wasn't to, go into a big story about my day. So I really got that getting out of myself and trying to help someone else, ultimately helped me. I can remember hearing that this woman say she didn't have bad days anymore. What did she say? She didn't have bad days anymore. Ultimately the message was, I'm only having a bad day if I'm thinking about myself, and if I'm not thinking about myself, I'm having a good day actually. And it made me realise how much time I spent thinking about myself. My thinking was about myself most of the time, which was not something that I had realised. I did identify with that, having a progressive disease that leads to the gates of insanity or death, because I had seen that in my father's life, and I felt like that was my reality too, because by the time I came in, I had been doing self-help therapy for 7 or 8 years, and I just thought that amount of self-help therapy should have been enough. I should have been better, but I wasn't better. Here I am, my back is against the wall again. I could recognise the progression of the disease in me. I found early recovery quite a lot of fun in many ways. It does sound a bizarre thing to say, but being in Bill and Bob's kindergarten was, I had hope, and there was a lot of early recovery that wasn't easy, because it involved asking for help, and it involved abandoning my old ideas. And I thought, well, I'm 37, so surely there's something that I know that's worth, holding on to. But not so really, because, my best thinking got me, to nervous breakdowns. And so I had a sponsor that had a lot of patience and tolerance, because I did not have a good attitude. But fortunately, you would think that somebody that has a terminal disease who is presented with a solution, as in if you went to a cancer ward and said to the people, there's a solution, would you like it? They'll definitely say yes, and they'll definitely take it. But with me and with us, we have to think about it, and think about whether it's a right option or not, or a good option. I got a lot of hope from it, hearing it was an action program, because I could take actions. I heard that it was okay to take actions, regardless of what your thinking was saying, which enabled me to keep coming back. because while I'm keeping coming back, I'm thinking about whether I like any of you, you know, or what my life, is going to be like. It was a bit cultish. It potentially seemed a bit cultish, you know, but that's just the diseased thinking, you know. The disease doesn't want us to get well. And I distinctly remember when I discovered the chapter in the big book that says working with others, I thought, oh my God, you know, I keep hearing in meetings, don't pick up the first one, get to meetings and try and help someone else. And then I realised that's where they get it from. They get it from that chapter in the big book. And I'd already, you know, decided that everything in the big book was good. If it was in the big book, it was good. It was good with me. So yeah, it wasn't a cult. It was just people practicing the program, and so it's been quite a few 1 days at a time now that I haven't had to pick up the first one, and I don't take my recovery for granted, and I know I'm not cured of this disease. I enjoy my life. I feel like a member of the human race. I don't want the food. Okay, I do like bigger apples rather than smaller. And I sometimes have 13 bananas in my fruit bowl, and I live by myself. But I think these are minor problems. They're not really to be worried about. I don't have a depressive disorder diagnosis. I don't suffer depression. I might sometimes have feel a bit flat, but that's just a normal human, reaction. I'm sitting here with this 12 steps and 12 traditions on my lap, and it's because there's a line that I particularly like in step 8, which we had a meeting on a few nights ago. It's learning how to live in the greatest peace, partnership and brotherhood with all men and women of whatever description is a moving and fascinating adventure. And it makes me want to laugh because it doesn't feel like a fascinating adventure sometimes. Everything I need, I have found in these rooms in terms of how to live life. I felt particularly challenged, a year or 18 months ago, like more challenged than I felt in my whole long time in recovery, which was a shock to me because, I thought I should be better than discovering discovering that I had very strong resentments towards certain of my colleagues. I was shocked at the depth of the resentment that I was having, and I really had to throw myself into the program, in a way that I hadn't, for quite some time, that has helped, trying to increase my conscious contact with God, trying to let go and let God, and just, remembering that my thinking is not me, and my thinking doesn't rule my life. I am not my thinking. I can behave better than how I feel, and I can certainly behave better than how I think, which gives me hope. And the program gives me hope for. I hear that the best years of our existence lie ahead, and I intend to keep coming because I like coming. I need to keep coming. I need to hear the solution because I need to practice these principles in all my affairs. on a daily basis. I really do need to do that, and I do that to the best of my ability, and it's really lovely to have a newcomer in the room and to see other new people, because it is such a good life on offer. And it's such a relief to have found this solution. Thanks for asking me to share.